I'm excited to be able to be here with you and to be able to dive into the Bible with you. We're going to be looking in John chapter 2. You can see it on the screen behind me. The verses we're going to be looking at, we're on page 740 if you're using the Bibles underneath the chairs. And I definitely encourage you to follow along in your own Bibles. But we are going to be showing everything on the screen. If you're new with us for the first time or have not been here in a while, you've not been a part of the series. But what we've been doing is working our way through the book of John, each section at a time, each verse at a time. And so last week we looked at the beginning of chapter 2. And in the beginning of chapter 2 is the scenario where Jesus turns water into wine. And if you remember that scenario from last week, that was one of those background kinds of things that Jesus did. He did it kind of on the down low. Not too many people knew and saw what was going on. Jesus was quiet. He backed out of the situation, did the miracle, then backed out of the situation. The whole thing was kind of quiet. The end of chapter 2, Jesus is not quiet. This goes completely the opposite direction, and we're going to take a look at it. So here we go, verse 13. It begins this way. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And I have to pause right out of the gate to be able to correct something here, because you look at this little phrase here, and this is the sort of thing that skeptics of the Bible like to make fun of in the Bible when they see phrases like this, right? Like he went up to Jerusalem. That doesn't make any sense, right? That's what they'll say. That's what the skeptics will say. Like you look at a map, it's going the wrong direction. Like the Bible is just so full of errors, right? There's all these things in the Bible that are wrong and they're stupid and they're whatever. And here we are, here's another one, right? It's down, not up. The Bible is so stupid. And we can just pause from all the TikTok commentators and just go, listen. There's some answers here. Like think about this in way of illustration. Think about even the way that we just talk today. Like you are sitting here right now, right? You're in the church. Here's a map. This part of Camillus, right? And if you go down to Home Depot. Think with me, with where we are. If you go down to Home Depot and you're at Home Depot, you're going to say, I'm going up to the church. Why do you say that? Because we live in Camillus here and we know there's this big hill that's there, right? There's a big hill. You're going up to the church. That's the way that works. And especially think about this, in the Bible times, what was the major mode of transportation? They're like walking pretty much everywhere they go. So I encourage you to walk from Home Depot to the church, and I guarantee you will forever say, I'm going up to the church, right? That's a sizable hill. That's the way you're going to be able to frame that, right? Well, that's the same thing here with them going into Jerusalem. Jerusalem was actually 3,000 feet higher in elevation than Capernaum. Like we're going up, right? So that's why he said it that way. So to my skeptic friends, love you, right? But please do a little bit more reading before we start posting on TikTok, right? The Bible's been around for several thousand years. People have been coming at it for a long time. There are answers on these things. You might just want to read a little bit before posting. Moving on. The Jews are celebrating Passover, and this time, if you don't know this time period and the way this would work, people would flood into Jerusalem from all over the place. The population in Jerusalem, historians tell us, is between 20,000 to 50,000 people, but during Passover, an additional 150 or so thousand people would come in. Some estimates put that up into the millions, but on the low side, 150,000. So you go from a population of 50,000 people to 150,000 more people coming in. The place is overrun, right? Like every place is busy, every place is hopping, there's a lot of people around. And that plays in here because, next verse, it says, in the temple courts he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and he drove them all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. And notice this here, right? These animals are being driven out. Like, you got to imagine these sellers that are there. Like, this is just business as usual for them. This is what they are normally doing as part of the temple system there and so forth. So they're just sitting there, and all of a sudden someone comes in and just driving all the sheep. We're like, what is going on here? He scatters the coins, the money changers, and he overturns the tables. And we're like, wait a minute, Jesus is flipping tables now, right? Like, what about meek and mild Jesus? What happened to him, right? What happened to pacifist Jesus? Like, what is going on? Like, it kind of doesn't make any sense at first glance, right? Chapter 2, remember, this chapter opens with Jesus quietly operating in the background, turning water into wine. It wasn't a flashy move. He didn't draw attention to himself at all. Very background. But here, Jesus just kind of appears to go off, right? And apparently for no real reason. So, like, what's going on here? What's going on? And if you're newer to the Bible and you're looking at this and you were with us last week, you're probably thinking already, it's like, well, I kind of like wine Jesus. better than I like flipping table Jesus. I'm more comfortable with the wine Jesus than the flipping table Jesus. That's probably what newer people of the Bible would say. But I've been around churches for quite a while, and I think a good number of church people actually like flipping table Jesus better than they like wine Jesus. It's kind of interesting. They're coming at that from different perspectives. But in either case, we actually need to look and see what it is that Jesus is actually doing. Just like we looked at it last week. What was actually going on with the wine stuff? We looked at that last week. Well, what's going on here? Why is Jesus doing this? We need to pause and we need to be able to look at it. Did Jesus go off here just because he lost his temper? Blew off the handle and so forth? No, not at all. Notice with me a couple different things. Notice, first of all, here it says he made a whip. He made a whip. That wasn't like a blink thing and it was done. He made a whip. It took some time. This was no flash of anger. It was deliberate. This was planned out. Looking at all four gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of them record this happening. All four of them do. And when we look at some of them, we get a better picture of what is going on. It says, as he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and he wept over it. In Mark 11, it says, and Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Then a few verses later, having spent the night there in Bethany, he went into Jerusalem. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. So again, looking at all four of these gospel accounts, we get to see a little bit better picture. And looking at all four gospel accounts, it actually is quite clear that Jesus actually did this two different times. He did it at the beginning of his ministry. He cleared the temple, just like we are seeing him do here in John 2. And then at the end of his ministry, right before he went to the cross, very shortly before that, he did it again. So the beginning of his ministry and end of the ministry, he cleansed the temple, is what this is typically referred to. He did this whole thing kicking people out. It's kind of interesting to see him beginning his ministry that way and ending his ministry that way in a way as well. So was this a rash decision? No, this was not made in haste. This was deliberate and planned out. Notice what we've already seen. He comes into Jerusalem and he's weeping for the city, weeping over the condition. Remember all those people that were there for these celebrations, and he is just weeping for all these lost people. And then he sees the condition of the temple courts. Notice that courts is referencing the courts. He's specifically calling that out. He looked around at everything that was happening there in the temple courts. And pay attention to that because we're going to come back to the courts thing in a minute. But he sees the condition of the temple courts, and then he comes back the next day, it says. A whole day has passed, right? So he's coming back the next day. This was not a flash, lose your temper kind of whatever. No, he actually stepped away and came back with the whip and so forth. Now, this is a series where we're looking at the Gospel of John, so we're wanting to stay focused there, but not get ourselves too distracted with side subjects. But the passage here kind of begs us to at least look for a moment at this anger thing, right? Is there such a thing as righteous anger? Yes, overwhelmingly there is such a thing as righteous anger. Yes, it should anger us when there's something that is very, very wrong and very, very not right. We should get angry about that, right? There's a righteous anger in that. And that's what's happening here with Jesus. What he's seeing, what is unfolding around him is something that is bad. How bad? Well, we're going to see that in a moment. But Ephesians 4 helps us here with this anger thing. Ephesians 4 says this, in your anger, do not sin. And it's an interesting way that the NIV translates this, because literally none of the other major translations of the Bible translate it this way. All the other ones translate it the same way. Be angry. Be angry. That's what it says. It assumes it. Like, be angry. It's okay to be angry about certain things because certain things are bad. They're wrong. Be angry about those things. It's okay to be angry in some situations. And you look at the Greek that's behind this, it lines up with this as well. Like, there is indeed a righteous anger. It is completely right to get angry over certain things. But in your anger, don't let anger get in the way of your own holiness and pursuit of God. Said differently, I'm angry over such and such. There's a sin thing that's going on over here. And I'm so angry at their sin that I'm going to sin. That doesn't make any sense, right? I don't get angry at their sin and then turn around and sin myself. That doesn't make any sense. That's what he's saying here. It's okay to be angry about some things that aren't good. These are bad things that are happening. But be careful that your anger over that doesn't lead yourself to be able to sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. Like, there's some decisions to be made. Yes, this is an injustice. Yes, this is whatever it is that I'm looking at that I'm getting angry about. But what am I going to do about that? There's some decisions that need to be made. But as I do that, I need to be careful not to give the devil a foothold. True that. How many times are we angry about this and that, and the thing just festers, and it starts to divide us from our kids, our spouse, our parents, our coworkers, or whatever it might be, and suddenly the devil not only has a foothold, like that's a rock climbing type term, right? You just need a little crevice to be able to get in there, and you can scale this thing. We're allowing Satan into our lives to mess with us on all kinds of different levels. The verse is directly speaking to this. So coming back here to Jesus, Jesus didn't sin. Instead, he took action to right the massive injustice that was occurring. He made a plan. He even took time to be able to make a whip and then came back the next day and stepped into the situation himself. It says in verse 16, to those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. You've turned church into a marketplace. That's what you've done. The takeaway, like there's all kinds of different takeaways for us, right? But bringing this into 2026, we can look at this and we're like, okay, so there's no selling Amway in the church foyer, right? You need to be a certain age probably to understand that reference, right? But there used to be this thing called Amway, right? And people would hawk goods on their friends that were overpriced, and they would do that in church. Maybe getting a little more closer to today would be, Girl Scout cookies or some booster club fundraiser, and we got to sell overpriced, insert product here, right? And so we end up doing those kinds of things at church. No, we shouldn't be doing any of that. That's not what church is for. So that's a takeaway, I suppose, that is here. But what's actually happening here and what Jesus is reacting to is actually much bigger than just the selling of things. It's much bigger than Girl Scout cookies. It's much bigger than Amway. Take a look at this, right? Looking at the Gospel of Mark actually helps a little bit with this because he gives us a little bit more information. We looked at part of this earlier, right? Jesus entered Jerusalem, went in the temple courts, looked around at everything. But since it was already late, he went to Bethany with the 12. Next day, on reaching Jerusalem, he entered the temple courts, began driving out those who were buying and selling there. We already looked at that. Next verse says, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temples, or through the temple courts. Notice here again, temple courts being referenced. He's not allowing any merch there. Why not? What's the big deal, right? What's the big deal? Let's think about this for a minute. Is it wrong for them to be buying and selling and whatever? If we're talking the Girl Scout cookie things, that's another conversation. What's happening here is people had come in for the Passover. So there's the sacrificing of the lambs and so forth that's happening as a part of those celebrations, right? And God in the Old Testament had made the provisions for buying a lamb if you didn't have one. If you didn't have a perfect, spotless lamb and so forth, all the requirements there in the Old Testament, if you didn't have that, you could buy one. And because people were traveling in from all over the known world, they might have a perfect spotless lamb, but it wouldn't fit in the overhead luggage compartment, right? They couldn't bring it along, right? Or by the time they made the big trip, it wouldn't be such a perfect lamb anymore, right? So instead of going through that hassle, you just make the trip with some coin, right? And when you get there, you'd buy a lamb. No problem. That provision was all there. So why was Jesus not allowing it here? What's going on? Well, check out the next verse. And as he taught them, he said, you just pause for a minute, you got to love this. Picture the scene, right? Jesus is flipping tables, driving out the animals, chucking the coins all over the place, right? And then in the middle of it, it says, and as he taught them, right? So as he's doing this, he's teaching, he's instructing, he's talking to them. He's giving instructions, letting them know in very clear terms why he's doing what he's doing. There's a lesson in it for them. Next verse, as he's teaching them, he points them to an Old Testament verse. Here's what it says. Jesus says, is it not written, referring to the Old Testament? My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of robbers. Man, this is like bombshell kind of statement here, right? And I get it. Reading this real quick, it's hard to see it unless you know some background information. So let me give you some of the background information. The temple in Jesus' day there in Jerusalem, let me walk you through a couple things. And I want to begin just by showing you a quick video that kind of gives an overview so you can kind of see what it is that we're talking about or where. right? So if the first thing I want to show you is at the top right, you'll notice this little garrison that's over here. This is Antonia Fortress, built by Herod the Great as a military garrison, and it was named after Mark Antony. Not that one, this one, all right? And this garrison, at the time of Christ, it was the main Roman garrison in Jerusalem. So the soldiers would be positioned there. Notice where it is in relation to the temple, right? Like we worry about government overwatch and overreach and so forth in church. They were literally a part of the wall at a higher elevation where they could look down in and keep an eye on things. Very interesting to see. They were definitely under Roman occupation at the time. But here's what I want you to be able to notice, right? There's these 4 courts. You might not recognize this right away. Let me show them to you. There's the 4 courts. This outer section, this just a massive space here, is the Gentile court. It was the section that the Gentiles were allowed to be able to come in. They couldn't go past it. They could only go right there. There's actually this 4.5-foot fence going around the outside of it. And historian Josephus tells us that at regular intervals along that fence, there were these signs. Translating it to Mark way of speaking, the signs would say, you owe yourself when you die, because they're going to kill you if you go past that, is what they're saying. It's a very stark warning. Nobody's allowed past this under penalty of death. That's what will happen to you. And it's actually interesting. We had no historical evidence of this kind of thing outside the Bible until somewhat recently. And so 2 of these signs are actually on display today in museums in Jerusalem and in Istanbul. It's kind of interesting. So we have these signs. So they can't go anywhere past that. But then there's the women's court, and I find this interesting, right? The women's court, it's actually 12 steps higher than the Gentiles. So the Gentiles were only able to go to a certain point. You'll die if you go past this. But the Jewish women, they were allowed to go past the Gentiles. That's how bad, the Gentiles, right? The women weren't treated very well in this time period, right? But the Gentiles were even worse in some of their view. It's interesting, right? And then, of course, there's the men's court towards the back, and then there's the temple itself where only the priests were allowed to be able to go. Interesting. Now, looking at all this, there's this question. Is all this biblical? Is this the way God set it up in the Old Testament? No, it's not. The only exclusion, there is no exclusion, right? The Old Testament commands only give one limitation, and that is inside the tabernacle itself. Only the priest could go, and only the high priest could go once a year into the Holy of Holies. That's the only exclusion. But as Jesus walks in, here at the Passover, he sees this huge courtyard that should be full of Gentiles. That's what the people had set up. God didn't set up this way. This is the way the Jewish people had set up, saying, hey, the Gentiles can come here. But instead of there being Gentiles there, it was packed with a marketplace. It was full of animals. It was full of merchants selling merch. It was all this different stuff that was there. It was very much not a place to gather and be able to worship. They had completely turned it into something completely different. They had missed the intent of the tabernacle that God gave them from the very beginning. Check out Numbers chapter 15. It says, then the Lord said, everyone who is a native born must do these things, the things talked about earlier in the chapters related to the tabernacle. Every native born, every Jew, in other words, must do these things in this way when they present a food offering as an aroma pleasing to the Lord. For generations to come, whenever a foreigner or anyone else living among you presents a food offering as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, they must do exactly as you do. But do it the same way as you Jews do. The same process, the same thing. Everybody's welcome in this. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for generations to come. As in, this isn't just a just now thing, God is saying, right? No, this applies to future generations as well. And the point he's making here is very clear in what he's saying. But just to spell it out, notice what he says next. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. You're both the same. Jew, Gentile, you're the same before the Lord. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and to the foreigner residing among you. Incredible. And then, of course, there's Isaiah 56. Isaiah 56 says this. This is what the Lord says. The Lord says, foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord, right? They're not Jews, but they are followers of God. These foreigners who bind themselves to God, like people who are ministering to him, people who love the name of the Lord, people that are his servants, people who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it, those who hold fast to my covenant, like those people who are truly following after God. Doesn't matter if they're Jews or not. Those people, those Gentiles that are actually following after God, those people I will bring to my holy mountain. What's he referring to? Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the very place that Jesus is standing, is what we're looking in John chapter 2. These people, the Gentiles, God says, will bring them into my holy mountain, and I will give them joy in my house of prayer. What are we talking about? The temple there in Jerusalem. God speaking, God pointing to this. He says that the Gentiles, their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. It's my altar, God says. It's my altar. It's my temple. God himself is welcoming them in. For my house, he says, will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Huge, huge. Long before the scenario with Jesus, this is what God is saying. God is being so very clear with us on this. Jesus being clear in what he's doing there in the temple. So much so that the Apostle Paul later, after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, the Apostle Paul is teaching on some things, and he picks up on this. Notice what he says. Paul wrote of this well-known dividing wall, right, as being a wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles in Ephesians chapter 2. Check this out. It says, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised. So who's he talking to? Gentiles. Very people that are being excluded here. The very people that Jesus is chucking tables and stuff over, the Gentiles. Remember, you were formerly Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised. You weren't on the inside of things. You were on the outside. Remember that? And remember that at that time, you who were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel and foreigners to the covenant of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. Do you remember all that? You remember that separation between you and God? But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups, Jews and Gentiles, made the two groups one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. You see what he's saying here, right? He's pointing to this very wall that Jesus is speaking about here in John chapter 2. You say, well, no, I think this is talking about, in the tabernacle. When Jesus died, it says the curtain was rent in two and so forth, so all could have direct access to God. No, that's not the context. That rent in two thing is for all people, Jews and Gentiles. The context that he's being talked about here is the Gentiles. God's speaking directly to the Gentiles. Remember that dividing wall that kept you apart from all the Jewish stuff? Remember that? I've torn that down. That's what Paul is pointing at. Like, it's goosebumps. Stop and think about what is being said here. From the very beginning, God wanted all people to come to him, and that includes in worship at the tabernacle. It was supposed to be open for everyone, but the Jews over the years had turned it into an exclusive club for insiders only. So Jesus here, he saw the signs, literally the signs telling them they could not proceed any further. He saw that. He saw that they were excluding the Gentiles. He saw that even the space that they had allotted for the Gentiles had become overrun, where now it was not a place to be able to come and worship and pray. It was a big marketplace. Jesus, he came and he saw all of that. And he went away, he made a whip, and he drove out the animals. He flipped the tables. He reminded people what the point of the temple was. This is to be a house of prayer for all nations, not just for Jews, not just for Americans, not just for insert nation here. It's for all nations. And then notice with me here what the next verse says. Right after Jesus did all this, it says this. His disciples, this is John now writing backwards in it, his disciples remembered later that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. This is a quote from Psalm 69, a psalm of David. And David was himself zealous for God's house. He had enemies. He had bad things going on in his life, struggles and difficulties and so forth. But in it all, he recognized big picture what is going on and God's work in the world, and he's focused there. Zeal for your house consumes me, David says. And the disciples remember that, and they go, David had that, and we see the same thing in Jesus. He's reacting to what is happening in the church, and it's not good. A whole bunch of people are being excluded, and what is being allotted for them is being overrun by other things. So even the place that they're supposed to be worshiping is not a very worshipful place to be able to be. They remember this. It's pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable what we're seeing here. These disciples, they're impressed as they look at Jesus, and they see his zealousness. But you know who's not impressed? The Jews that were running the temple. You can imagine they were not too impressed with this, right? It says the Jews, they responded to him, what sign can you show us here to prove your authority to do all this? Right? Translation, dude, who are you, right? You coming in here, we've been doing this for like a long, long time. We're the people in charge, and you're just coming in here flipping tables and pointing to verses or whatever. Like, who are you? Anyways, if you're some prophet or something, do a sign to give some kind of evidence of who you are. Interesting. We've seen this throughout the book, but this time, notice with me what Jesus does. Verse 19, Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. They replied, it has taken 46 years to be able to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? Like, you have to admit that's an honest answer, right? Like, they're standing there in the temple. Jesus says, tear it down, I'll build it in three days. Their automatic assumption is the temple that they're standing in. That makes sense. But Jesus isn't referring to the temple. But the temple he had spoken of was his body, that he is God in the flesh. Remember chapter 1, God in the flesh, tabernacled among us. Jesus, his body is the temple. And this isn't exactly a new concept for those of us who are Christians. As later on, the Apostle Paul points out to us, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you've received from God? That the Holy Spirit tabernacles within us. He resides inside of us. So we are a temple, God residing inside of us. Again, in 1 Corinthians 3, do you not know that you yourselves are God's temple and that the Spirit dwells in your midst? For we are the temple of the living God, right? So yes, Jesus here points out that he is God dwelling among them. So he is tabernacled among them. He is the temple. And yes, they will kill him. They will destroy him, but he will be raised 3 days later. Like, it's a huge statement, one that actually no one understood when he first said it. Even the disciples didn't understand what he was saying. John gives us this little insight in what he says next. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken after Jesus arose from the dead. Think about that. After Jesus rose from the dead, there was all kinds of things that Jesus had been teaching and saying and so forth they didn't quite get, but all of a sudden, now after he's raised from the dead, things are starting to click for them. And this was one of them. After. It's interesting. They'd heard Jesus say a lot of things, but didn't all click right away. And maybe that's true for some of us here today as well, where maybe we've been in church for a long time or been looking on and off at things of the Bible, but it hasn't clicked yet. We don't really understand who it is Jesus is. We don't understand all the teachings. It hasn't clicked yet. Well, for the disciples, that process took them about 3.5 years before things started to click. And here it says they believed. And it bolstered their faith and trust in the scriptures and the words that Jesus has spoken to them about such things. They believed, it says. They believed. Now, I want to focus on that word here for a minute because that word's an interesting word in the Bible in general, and especially in the writings of John here in the Gospel of John. In the New Testament, this word believe is used approximately 250 times in its different iterations. Believe, believed, believes, so forth, right? 250 times. Roughly 100 out of the 250 are in the Gospel of John. And notice with me what we said right from week 1. We pointed out towards the end of the book of John. He said, these things are written that you may believe, right? Like, it's a major focus on John. He's pointing us. He wants us to be able to believe. And he's pointing us at all kinds of things about Jesus that we might believe. So 100 of the 250 references to this word believe are in the Gospel of John, this book that we're studying together. So I point that out because the disciples' growing belief in Jesus is a part of what we're seeing here in the gospel, but also because of what comes next here and what we're about to look at. Because what we're about to look at is absolutely devastating in one sort of way. It is. It's a devastating reality, what John points out to us next. Let's take a look at it. It says, now while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, after he had cleared out the temple and so forth, many people saw the signs he was performing, and they believed in his name. Don't get excited yet. Notice what he says next. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. This is a powerful, huge section of the Bible that we really need to come to grips with. We need to be able to understand what is said here. Because for some of us, this is an almost crippling verse for us this morning. If we get it, if we understand what is here. But probably we don't at first glance. So it's my job to be able to make sure we understand this, because it's super important and you get it. Like, you might be here today with your spouse, or you might be here with your kids or your parents or whatever, and you might think, hey, I'm good with God. You know, I believe. I said a prayer, whatever, and I'm good with God. But these couple verses might prove to you that you're actually not good with God. It's a huge verse, huge couple verses. So pay attention to this. This is very, very important. Some people saw Jesus stuff. They saw Jesus doing this and that, and it says they believed. I believe. I'm a Jesus person. I believe. They maybe said a prayer. I believe I'm all good. It's what many people today say as well. But notice with me here that Jesus outright rejects them. He rejects them. Why? Because Jesus knows. He knows who is real and who is fake. He knows who has the kind of, belief that, I'll show up to church every once in a while. I'll do that. Like, I believe, right? But actually on Monday or a Tuesday or a random Thursday, their life is just like everybody else's life. There's nothing about this belief in Christ that impacts a random Tuesday. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. Jesus knows that. Like, there's no fooling him. He's God. So he knows if someone truly believes or if they don't. He doesn't need your parents or your spouse or your pastor to come in and fill him in on whether your faith in him is real or not, right? Like, I'm not so sure. I was kind of paying attention to the Middle East. There's a few things going on over there right now, so I was over there. So I'm going to call Pastor Mark, and just see how this person's doing, whether they're really saved or not. He doesn't need that. He knows. He's God. He doesn't need my input on that. He knows. He knows what's inside of you. He knows the truth, to which some of us might recoil a little bit, right? This is pretty heavy section of the Bible here, Pastor Mark. Like, how am I supposed to know if my belief is the right kind of belief? A belief that Jesus accepts as being genuine belief. Well, that's a great question. It's actually a huge question. But it's not a difficult one to answer on one level. Now, you might have specific questions that relates to you. We'd have to interact on that one-on-one, and I'd be more than happy to do that. That would be fun. But on the big picture, it's not a difficult question to answer. So let me explain it for you real briefly with two illustrations. And I've given both these before. If you've heard them before, just walk with me for a minute so everybody can get it. Okay? Two illustrations. First of all, with my kids when they were little, I don't know, 8, 9, someplace in there, we had a wood stove that we had just gotten, and so I'm trying to teach them hot, right? Don't touch hot. So I don't know about your young men, but my young men go, right? Hot. I told you, hot, right? And they learned, like all of us at some point in life learned hot means hot. And what do we do when something is hot or we know something's hot? We stay away. Like, we go through all kinds of gymnastics to stay away. Like, if you're into camping at all and you're around a campfire or a bonfire or something and you trip and you start to go towards the fire, what do? Oh, I'll just go into the fire. No, like, you do all kinds of janky movements, throw out your back or whatever else to stay away from the fire. Why? Because it's hot. You believe it's hot. Your belief in hot and your understanding of that belief affects then the way that you act, the way that you pivot around that. It affects everything with that. This is belief. Belief, genuine belief, always translates into real world action. Well, I believe it's hot, but I'm just going to step into the fire. Real world belief translates into action. No, I'm going to act different based on the reality that this is hot. First illustration. Second illustration. I've given this before, but walk with me. There's a story told of a tightrope walker. Stretched the rope across Niagara Falls, and he's going across the rope. Comes back, goes out 10, 15 feet, comes back. Yeah, how many think I can do it with a wheelbarrow? Yeah, so he takes a wheelbarrow out, brings it back. Yeah. How many people think I can do it with my partner here? Yeah. So puts the person in the wheelbarrow. They go out, come back. Woo, nice job. How many think I could do it? Volunteer from the audience, do it with them? Yeah. Who'd like to volunteer? It's real quiet, real quick. We believe you can do it. Yeah, who wants to volunteer? There's belief they would get in the wheelbarrow, and there's belief they wouldn't get in the wheelbarrow. Belief. Listen, here's the analogy. Belief in Jesus, trust fully in Jesus, not in ourselves. Belief in Jesus, trust fully in Jesus, not ourselves. Like there's the belief and the actions and so forth. But think about this. When I'm sitting in the wheelbarrow, right? If I'm going to get in the wheelbarrow, I've been practicing for this, like for years now, and I've gotten pretty good at sitting in a wheelbarrow. I've got the skills. I think that's going to get me across this rope because I'm really good at sitting in a wheelbarrow. That's stupid, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. Your only hope as you get in that wheelbarrow is the person that's got a hold of those handles and is walking you across the tightrope. You're trusting fully in their capabilities, not in yours. It's not about you. It's not about your capabilities. It's not about how good you are. It's not about none of that kind of stuff. No, belief in Jesus, trust fully in Jesus, not in ourselves. We get in the wheelbarrow. We trust what it is that God has done for us in his death, burial, and resurrection. Hopefully, that makes sense to you, clarifying some of this on belief. But if not, here's an illustration as to how these two things get put together, how they do and how they do not work together. Senator Cory Booker, this is not a political thing, it's just a quote, right? But on his Facebook and Twitter page, X now, right, in 2010, he wrote this: "Don't speak to me about your religion. First show it to me in how you treat other people." It's kind of good. Notice he's talking about the belief always translates into action. That's what he's pointing at, right? That's what he's pointing at. Don't tell me how much you love your God. Show me how much you love all of God's children. It's kind of pointing to the first one. Belief always translates into real world action. Don't preach to me your passions for your faith. Teach me through your compassion for your neighbors. He's pointing out faith, it always results in action. In the end, I'm not as interested in what you have to tell or sell as I am how you choose to live and how you choose to give. It's pretty good, right? Like he's pointing at that. Belief always translates into real world action. He's pointing at that. That kind of makes sense. And no disrespect to the senator here, but here's what gets missed. Here's what gets missed and why this is very important. We look at this in terms of belief as we sit here and we look at what Jesus said in John 2. And his rejection of these people that, I believe, but they didn't believe. He knows their heart. Here's what's very, very important as we look at this. All of what Cory is looking at here is based on what I'm doing. I'm not interested, I want to see by your actions and da-da-da. But we missed something there. All that we're focused on is me sitting in the wheelbarrow going, I'm awesome. Look at all the stuff that I'm doing and da-da-da. No. The criminal on the cross that turned to Jesus, and Jesus said, today you'll be with me in heaven. Remember that, right? That scenario. Did he go to church? No. Did he give any money to the church? No. Was he baptized? No. Did he take communion? No. What did he do? Did he do any of the stuff that Cory talks about here? No, he was a horrible, despicable human being who in the very, very end recognized who Jesus is, recognized his own sinfulness, and he turned to Jesus. He simply got in the wheelbarrow and said, Jesus, I trust you. And Jesus goes, got this, and walked him right into heaven. That's the scenario that is here and why it's so important that we be able to see it. So there's the question for you, where are you on these two things? Does your belief in Jesus show up in meaningful ways, Monday through Friday, the Cory Booker kinds of stuff, right? Does it show up? Or are we really no different than our neighbors, coworkers, or whatever? And what are you trusting in on the daily, yourself or God? Because eternity actually rests in the balance there. Search these things out. You got questions, I'd love to be able to interact with you on them, grab a coffee, something, let's talk, that'd be great. But on the first part here, like if you are a true believer in Jesus, you maybe need to think in light of this passage, just for yourself personally, like for you personally, are there any tables in your own life that kind of need flipping? Things in your life that are out of whack? Maybe you've made church all about you. Maybe you ignore outsiders when they come in. Maybe you've done worse and not even really ever considering what it is that God has created the church for. You walk in and give no thought to what it is that God is doing here. We're only focused on ourselves. We've made the courtyards into something completely different than what God intended. Is that us? What is the point of what God has set up in church? The Old Testament was clearly called a place of prayer for the people from all nations. What has God said of the church? When we come together as a church family, what's the point? And are you coming to church with that goal in mind or something else entirely? Like, I can't answer that for each of you. It's something you have to sit with God with and think about, spend some time in prayer with Him on. But based on the seriousness of what we see Jesus saying here in the end of chapter 2, it's something that we really need to do some soul searching on. And again, if I can help with that, just ask. So stand with me if you would, and I want to give us just a moment to be able to talk with God. Go ahead and stand with me. I want to just give you a moment to be able to talk to God on these things. There's the church for all nations stuff at the beginning of what we looked at today. In Psalm 139, it says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart to see if there is any wicked way in me." Is there something in me in this that I need to confess before the Lord? We need to think that through. We need to think that through in light of Jesus flipping tables. And what about belief in Jesus, what we saw here at the end of chapter 2? Are there any action on Tuesday to prove that that's real? And what about the wheelbarrow? Are you in or are you out? Every head bowed, every eye closed. I'll give you a moment to talk to God on these things, and then I'll close this in a word of prayer. God, we do, first of all, just thank you for the big picture of what you've provided for us here today in this second part of John chapter 2, a pretty huge rebuke for those of us who've turned church into something completely different than what you created it for. God, we easily stand here in 2026 and laugh at the silliness of the Jews and their little 4.5-foot fence to keep the Gentiles out. We laugh at that. But we often in our personal lives erect even bigger fences to keep certain people out of not only our church, but out of our lives entirely. God, help us with that. Like, seriously, help us. We need your help on that. We need to be your help just to be able to see it, because sometimes we're blind to our offenses like this. Help us to see this end, and help us to see ways we can take steps today to rectify. Help us to see you in all of this, to see you for who you are, and to see your church for what you created it to be. That it might not just be a place of prayer for us, but that it might be a place of prayer for all people. And help us, Father, to, for those of us that have a certain level of belief, but have yet to have gotten into the wheelbarrow, God, we need your help. Help us to trust in you fully, to rest on your work done for us there on the cross in the empty tomb. You're taking over our sin penalty, or you're taking on our sin penalty, rather, on yourself. And then 3 days later, raising again, victorious over sin and death, having taken away that dividing wall that separated us from you. Father, in our unbelief, help us to believe. Help us to trust. Help us to fully rest in your power and capability to save us. And then help us from there, Father. Transform us as belief, genuine belief, always results in action. In Jesus' name and for Jesus' glory in these days, I pray these things. Amen.